So this is our first sort of move away from how to take ecological reflections and situate it in a philosophical paradigm of ecostentialism and what that should look like. So the crux of the problem facing us as humans, as people, as beings inhabiting the world is one of a dire natural kind. Our societies are beset by the struggles of race, class, and gender, made more complicated by ageism, xenophobia, and profiteering. All of these problems exist somewhere. They occur in a place, and they are made worse by the worsening conditions of their locatedness. In ecological reflections, we noted the veracity of this claim by examining the ways that domination of nature manifests in the lives of individuals unfortunate enough to be on the wrong end of a power structure that devalues their existence. Patriarchal, militaristic, and capitalistic. Existence can only be valuable if the existence in question is viewed as desirable, if that existence is determined to be strategically useful, and if that existence can be turned into the fuel that powers the engines of social domination. This is true. I take that to be true. If you don't, we're going to be at odds from page 1, right? So you just have to bear with me. It is against this asymmetrical determination of power that ecostentialism seeks to find its ground, common to all those who struggle. My position is that any decent person wants to see racial strife ended, wants to eradicate a class society that destroys lives, and wants to remove the inequality of gender. My position is also that what drives most decent people to despair, to dishonesty with themselves about the realities of these things, is that these issues are deeply entangled and represent a problem so large in scope that any individual is certain to feel overwhelmed by it. This is the essence of an ecostential crisis, and I believe our deconstruction of monstrosity helps reveal the ways to address these issues. To conceive of the monstrous as part of the human experience, it is necessary to understand how the monstrous reveals us to ourselves. This happens in two ways. First, through our relationship to monstrousness at the level of an emotive response. That is, at the level of visceral contact with ourselves. And secondly, how that interrelationship reveals itself externally in our relationship to nature, in its multifaceted existence. I believe there are 4 ways to approach these 2 revelatory aspects of the human condition that will help us more fully develop and make comprehensible the project of ecostentialism. And these 4 philosophical lenses are the stranger, the creature, the thing, and the other. And I'm going to argue, as they move us to greater abstraction, they also move us closer to understanding. And what we're going to do tonight is work on the stranger. Subsequent lectures will deal with creature, thing, and other. To achieve the kind of understanding I am advocating, ecostentialism is to provide for the modern environmentally conscious person. We must recognize that we are not merely rehashing philosophical concepts in newer, trendier language. Rather, we are reinterpreting those concepts, we are deconstructing those concepts, and we are discovering those concepts. And in the process, not simply gaining a greater understanding of ourselves as individuals, but gaining insights into how one ought to fit in the world. Remember from a couple of weeks ago, ecostentialism is an attempt to derive an understanding of existence that is being as belonging. So first then, we'll focus on the stranger. Consider the stranger, the form of the other we are most comfortable with, and its place in our social interactions. The stranger is suspicious, conspicuous, mysterious, dangerous, and sometimes deadly. The stranger represents that presence in our lives that disrupts by occupying a place of abnormalness, a break with the routine, but a break that is discontinuous with our experience and expectations. The stranger is an unknown occupant, an unwanted presence, a presence that does not belong. Our encounters with strangers, and by extension strangeness, betokens that which is not I, and more precisely, that which is an unwanted not I. Inversely, when we experience ourselves as the stranger, it is unsettling. I do not belong here. I am uncomfortable. I am fearful, hesitant, anxious, suspicious, etc. So our encounters with strangeness, both as an unwanted presence of other and of ourselves as the unwanted presence, leads to an emotional and intellectual interpretation of the world. My position is that we can change the way we live in the world and in relation to other beings in such a way that we can address the social issues we face as individual categories, race, class, and gender, and so forth, by altering how and where we belong in the world. This sense of belonging must originate from a way of thinking that is not only opposed to the power structure of human society as it currently exists, but is radically different in how we conceive of the self, other beings, and the world as existence. My position is that people think of their life as a valuable thing, that is, a life worth having. The individual and societal crisis identified by existentialists was aimed at this very idea. Why is my life valuable? What about my existence is special? How does my life have meaning? What is that meaning? How do I know there's something about my life worth having? These are existential questions. I think we can, to a certain extent, table these concerns. Which is not to say that they are not concerns worth considering, but rather that for most people, at their most basic and fundamental formulation, these questions are always already answered in the context of social power, dynamics that always already determine what the value of existence is. Maybe not an individual existence per se, but existence more generally. This is done by desire and use and the consolidation of power. Perhaps the best way to think of our ecostential crisis is to understand it as preceding an existential crisis. Presumably, we have been struggling with our relationship to nature since we understood our place in it as dislocatingness. Our banishment from Eden hinges on an acquisition of knowledge about ourselves and our place in the world, and that knowledge results in our displacement. The long arc of human history that has delivered us into the prevailing capitalistic conditions is one story of people striving to dominate the world and deliver themselves from nature. We are, as a species, deeply committed to this goal. But how we have determined the locus of power throughout this history of ours is largely dependent on one particular aspect of human existence. The one thing we all share that has been used to define power, acquire power, and deploy power: consumption. Consumption is our most intimate connection to the environment. Consumption sustains us, houses us, clothes us, protects us. Consumption is literally the mechanism through which we individually and collectively define our interaction with the world. So it makes sense that consumption should lie at the heart of ecostentialism as an attempt to better understand and articulate being as belonging. Considering consumption as a problem at the heart of what it means to change ourselves, to radically reconceive of how we belong to the world, requires that we understand consumption more dynamically than just what we eat. What do we consume? This is sort of the essence of the question. The life force of nature. But we are a part of nature, and not merely as a piece is to a puzzle, but as an integrated part, a link in a loop. In ecological reflections, this was determined to be a strange loop. We have taken to adapting our view of the world to accommodate our desire to overcome our naturalness, to break with nature and set ourselves apart from the world. We have been striving to understand ourselves as pieces by trying to see the picture made by the puzzle, lacking those pieces. Our whole epistemic framework for conceptualizing ourselves is built upon the artificial scaffolding that we can fill in the gap of our absence in nature. So this is sort of how I'm pitching the problem, right? To think of the link in a loop as a corrective is perhaps too hasty, because we are tempted to merely think of a chain link and wonder how that is different than a puzzle piece, and then rebuild the artificial buttress of our separation anew. So instead, I'd suggest thinking of it in the same way one might think of the garter stitch used in knitting. And if you don't know anything about knitting, that's like the most basic stitch that like creates the foundation of like a scarf or a sweater. These loops are individual but deftly connected across the entire matrix of the garment. To undo the knitting is to undo the garment. The loss of a link merely straightens the chain, but the loss of the knitted link unravels the entire garment, reducing what was an integrated whole into an unrecognizable but entangled mess. Undoing the knit does not free the fabric from its connection to itself, and plucking the human element out of the natural does not render us free of our integration with the whole, but rather renders everything different or strange. Consumptive synergy is the life force of nature. Taking and giving back in a cyclical, reciprocal, symbiotic way allows for the destruction and construction of life. It makes degeneration and generation sympathetic processes. Consumptive synergy is the loop we are undoing. We overconsume, we underconsume, we prioritize profit over value and profit over life. We are a destructive force that is not capable of construction any longer, not in the natural sense. Marx describes capitalists as vampires for just this reason. It is with this in mind that I raise the first issue of monstrosity, which I believe will help us gain clarity about the reality of the crisis we face, but at the same time provide us with a sense of what we are attempting to create with respect to the worldview that is ecostentialism. The issue is the problem of strangeness. Strangeness is off-putting. Strangeness is unsettling. Strangeness, especially in the form of strangers, is the first glimpse of monstrosity I want to deconstruct. Having a stranger in our midst breeds distrust and suspicion, concern, and fear. The strangeness of monstrosity is accessible in the form of three monsters as consumers that exist squarely in our moral vision: vampires, werewolves, and zombies. But before we talk about monsters, I'd just like to point out that if you had gotten here early enough before I forced everyone to the front of the room, you would have noticed that everybody was sitting as far from everyone else as possible. Because there's something about strangeness that drives us apart, right? So we have to figure out where our relationship with strangeness lies, and this is why we're going to do vampires, werewolves, and zombies.